August 1943. Picture this. My grandfather, a South African Air Force pilot, standing in the heat of Cape Bon, Tunisia. The airbase was straddled with broken Ju-52s, some on their noses, some on their side, and some with a wing in the ground, lying all over the place. He had 17 other ranks under me, from flight sergeant downwards. They were due to return to the Union. Jokingly, he said, "If you build up a Ju-52, I'll fly the lot of you back to the Union." The Germans, when they left, they smashed all the instruments. He had nothing. He didn't have an airspeed indicator. He didn't have a fuel indicator gauge. He didn't have an oil pressure gauge. Nothing. All it had was a relay compass that was situated right up high in the tail, as far away from the engines as possible to cut down on the magnetic interference. With the 17 blokes, and he said, "Well, look, I'm taking a Maza and 1,000 rounds of ammunition back to the Union." So the least he could do was to say to these blokes was that they could each take a Maza and 1,000 rounds of ammunition. So he got into the old Ju-52 and revved up the old motors, no rev counter, but they sounded all right. He took the flight sergeant with him and opened the throttles, and away they went and took off. They flew around the circuit and came in and landed, and she behaved like a honey. "All you have to do now is to sit tight until I get my marching orders," he said, "and I'll fly the lot of you back to the Union." On August 23rd, they set off with 18 Mausers and 18,000 rounds of ammunition, along with 56 tyres. The Ju-52 engines rumbled over the endless blue of the Mediterranean. 3 hours and 50 minutes in the air, the sun dipping low, no sign of land. My grandfather made a snap decision: steer for Castel Benito, just outside Tripoli, touchdown at dusk. Now, these guys had made a damn good job of fixing the airplane, but they didn't have any paint to paint the swastika roundels on the side of the airplane. My grandfather didn't realize that he was to be the target, and there was a flare path in full operation. There were aircraft taking off this beastly runway, and that's why it was lighted up. There was nobody taking off when he came down on the bloody treetops. Now it struck him there were swastikas on the airplane. Security swarmed the plane, rifles at the ready. My grandfather opened the door, and he held up my hands, and he cried out, "Don't shoot, don't shoot, onze mensa, don't shoot," and they turned out to be quite nice blokes. Not exactly a textbook landing, but it worked. That night he played poker with the CO and a few of his buddies, and he walked off with 27 pounds at the end of it and had the time of his life. The next day the journey got even tougher. Marble Arch is just a little station for motor vehicle transport. He had no movement papers, he had nothing with him, but the operations were far away. But here he was flying a Jerry airplane with no papers. But anyway, after a lot of talking, he talked them into giving him some full tanks. They flew south, hugging the North African coastline. He landed at the next place and filled up with petrol, and he nearly signed CS Cop and PEP General J.C. Smooths. He could have gone straight across the desert, but he didn't fancy that. So he went round to Mersa Matruh from Marble Arch, El Adem, Mersa Matruh, El Maza, each stop a race against time and failing fuel. Sometimes 3 hours, sometimes less than 2 in the air. Every flight a gamble. A mate of mine, Col Coetzee, later had copped it. He knew what I was doing, and he thought this is a damn good idea, so he also got his guys to build him a Ju-52. At Wadi Malakal, disaster nearly struck the heavy Ju-52, bogged down in the mud, so he went to see the district commissioner, and the old DC said, "Well, I can raise about 300 prisoners and various people," so my grandfather said, "Well, let's try." So he came out with his 300-odd bods, and these people all put their hands underneath that airplane, picked it up bodily, and put it on the tarmac. I again had to fight with the RAF for petrol, and I got my tanks full of petrol. No problem with the takeoff. No GPS, just gut instinct and some serious teamwork. The Ruwenzori Mountains loomed next, thick clouds and dangerous peaks. You had to cross the Ruwenzori Mountains, and they are 9,000 feet high, and so you have to fly at least 9,000 feet high to get above them. That was a guts of an altitude for these old junkers. So with wide open throttles you make a rush for it, and if you hit a slight downdraft and you're next to the side of the mountain, so you just turn away. My grandfather kept his cool, had about 10 goes at it, and they couldn't make it, so he went back to Kisumu and he got another fill up of petrol, and they had another go at it very early in the morning when the air was nice and dense, and managed to get up to 9,000 feet. And they got over the Ruwenzori Mountains with no further problems, and then we landed at Tabora. Then 3 hours and 20 minutes across to Kasama. Home was almost in sight. I didn't say this before, but all the way down he had a chap at the back in the tail reading the compass, and he would say left, left, and they would give my grandfather the course to steer. Now this airplane had a step inside, so he would call out to the chap standing next to him, who would call out to the chap at the step, who would call out to the chap at the back of the step, who would call out to the chap at the bottom of the tail, who would call out to the chap at the compass in the tail, from Kasama to Lusaka, then Bulawayo, no problems, then Pietersburg, then came the trouble coming into the Union. The CO at Pietersburg at the time was Carpi Martin. They were mates for a long time, so he landed at Pietersburg and he said, "Carpi, I've got this problem." Well, it cost him 2 motorcar tyres. And old Carpi said, "Okay, off you go." So when they landed at Pietersburg, he didn't tell Carpi about this. He told the mechanics to take the bloody door off and put it inside. They put the door inside and they took off from Pietersburg with a great big gulping hole in the side of the plane. Now my grandfather's brother was managing a large estate on the flats, Springbok Flats. Tyres were raining down from the aircraft and bouncing on the ground and then leaping into the air and bouncing in all directions over this land. The neighbour De Beers tractor driver got such a fright that he jumped off the tractor, ran away, and the tractor piled through the fence at the end of the land and came to rest all buggered against some trees. The neighbour got hold of the police. He said, "How can these bastards in uniform get tyres and we can't?" They got the Swartkops and out came the first blokes with the aerosols to spray the yellow fever mosquitoes. Bit of a waste of time because they flew with the door wide open. When they landed they ran and ran and ran right to the end of the runway, so the blokes tried to put the door on quickly, but the aircraft was bent and it would not fit. Then they had to get rid of the rifles and ammunition, and they piled out the rifles and the ammunition into the grass. They would come back later for the guns and ammunition, so they stopped on the tarmac and everyone was very pleased to see us except the health people. Then they couldn't find anyone to fly that damn thing to Germiston, so my grandfather had to get back in the plane and fly it to Germiston. Then he thought he had got away with everything, and then the police got hold of him and he had to explain. A car full of tyres later, all was good. He never heard any more about it until the end of war, and he was clearing himself and he went into DMI, military intelligence. And he saw his file, which was about 3 inches thick, and they had a look through his file and he was court-martialed. Luckily, General Brink and he were great buddies, and the final letter in the file read, "In view of this officer's distinguished war record," and that was the end of their trip. My grandfather went right through the war with a plate in his leg from a motorbike accident. He did his instructor's rating and at one time had more hours on tiger moths than anyone else has ever had. He learnt to fly on Sopwith camels and flew many World War I types. He was an absolute master at aerobatics. Remember, he had joined the Air Force well before the war. He was still playing a good game of golf, although with a golf cart, right up to the time of his death at the age of 85 years. Years later, at my grandmother's 80th birthday, Len Hobson shared the full story, a tale that now lives on at the South African Air Force Museum. So next time you walk through those museum halls, remember, sometimes the wildest journeys aren't in the headlines, they're in family stories, whispered across generations. For my family and for the SAAF Museum.